Jimmy McGill and then Saul Goodman made a number of poor decisions throughout the 14 years that we followed him on our TV screens. His relationship with Chuck was painful to watch as it contained lies, deception, mistrust, and an unwillingness to see the other person's perspective. He cozied up to the cartel, he had an unhealthy obsession with Howard Hamlin, and he screwed things up with the love of his life, Kim Wexler. But there's one big decision that Jimmy makes in Season 1, Episode 4, that might be the most heartbreaking decision we see Jimmy make. Even if it's not the number one most heartbreaking decision, I'm definitely putting it in my top 5 of the entire series. This decision will slowly lead to tragedy for Jimmy, even if he cannot see the repercussions of this right away. Knowing the big picture consequences of this decision, along with the masterful musical score and directing, leads me to say that this is one of the best and most consequential scenes in the entire series. What scene am I referring to? Well, we're going to get there in a second. The episode begins in Cicero, Illinois, in a flashback to the good old Slippin' Jimmy days. Jimmy and his Mark are walking through an alley after drinking when the Mark asks for Jimmy's name, and Jimmy responds by calling himself Saul Goodman for the very first time in the series.
Saul? Saul good, man.
Then they find a wallet filled with cash belonging to some fat guy. Now, after a beautiful melody by Marco, Jimmy's friend, who is pretending to be drunk, Jimmy and Marco make off with $500 by pretending that Marco was wearing a real Rolex when, of course, it was just a knockoff. Following that scam, Marco compliments his sidekick Jimmy, saying, "I just love watching you work." Jimmy is hesitant to accept this compliment, saying, "This is good for beer money, but not much else." And that's a useful line to understand how Jimmy viewed these schemes at the time. Jimmy did not always see conning as his own way to get through life. The way he regarded it here with Marco is more like a hobby, something you do once or twice a month as opposed to a way of life. Then we get back to the present, where Jimmy is rounding up Betsy and Craig Kettleman outside of their tent. As you may recall from Episode 3, Craig and Betsy pretended to be kidnapped when really they were just camping far, far in their backyard, trying to avoid the cops. When Jimmy confronts them, they don't want to turn themselves in, so they offer Jimmy a bribe to keep quiet and say that he never saw them. Jimmy says that he cannot accept a bribe, but he can accept a retainer, pushing himself close to this ethical line without overtly going over it. It's at that moment that Betsy gives him a pitiful look and utters a line that's going to haunt Jimmy for the rest of his career by saying,
"You're the kind of lawyer guilty people hire."
And Betsy and Craig, they are not guilty. That scene ends without a resolution as to what happened with the bribe, the retainer, the money, and how things ended up between Jimmy and Betsy. Now, a few scenes later, back in Jimmy's office in the nail salon, we come into what I think is one of the more depressing, heartbreaking, and beautifully created scenes of the first season and the entire series. Jimmy enters his office, which is also his home, in the back of the nail salon. He's taking a shot of alcohol with Herbie Mann's Battle Hymn of the Republic playing. Jimmy is right in the middle of our screen with the sides of the screen blurred, and Jimmy is at first staring at that alcohol, but then he grabs his drink and his eye is still on something and he's looking forward, but the audience, we have no idea what he's looking at, but we know that he's looking at something intently. Then the music increases the emotions in the scene, as right at the part of the song where you would hear the singing of "Glory, Glory, Hallelujah," Jimmy reaches out his hand and he pulls the object that he'd been staring at into focus. It's the Kettleman bribe money. And at that moment, we know that he succumbed to Betsy Kettleman's bribe. He's not drinking to celebrate. He's drinking to get through what at this point is likely the biggest ethical lapse of his life. He creates some fake invoices to launder the money properly without coming close to breaking a smile. He is not doing this happily. At the end, he quotes a Bible verse that Jesus actually said to his disciples. Now, the line that Jimmy repeats is,
"Upon this rock I will build my church."
In the Bible, Jesus is saying that to Peter, one of his disciples, in the hopes that Peter will be the rock of the church after Jesus is gone. In the same way, with my very mediocre theological skills, Jimmy is putting his foot down, he's planting his flag, and he's saying that he will take on these ethical violations for the pursuit of his own church, his law career. Everything about this scene in my mind was pitch perfect, and it brought out an enormous amount of emotions for a scene in the middle of the 4th episode in a 10-episode season. The writing by Jennifer Hutchinson touched the perfect note of having Jimmy explain how he was going to launder the money while at the same time not giving us too much needless dialogue. After all, he was alone in his office, so you couldn't try to fill in the viewers too much with Jimmy's words, or else it would not be natural. But the writing just hit the pitch perfect tone, and credit to the director of the episode, Colin Buxey, who got the exact right angle to start the scene off and leaves us with the right amount of intrigue as to us wondering what Jimmy's looking at before we realize that it's the bribe money for Betsy Kettleman. Now, if YouTube allows me, I am going to upload that full clip, and you should also absolutely search for Herbie Mann's version of the Battle Hymn of the Republic on YouTube. Throughout the rest of the episode, Jimmy leans into this new identity. After being ordered to remove the billboard that shows Jimmy looking exactly like Howard Hamlin with the nice suit, the nice hair, as well as an exact copy of the HHM logo, Jimmy stages an incident where a construction worker who is trying to take down that billboard, he stages a fall only for Jimmy to come save him and get the free publicity that comes with it. While he gets 7 voicemails after the stunt, the people that know him best are not buying it. Kim knows deep down what he did, Howard called BS on it, and when Jimmy goes to see his brother at the end of the episode, he can't even bring in Chuck's newspaper that has his heroic act on it because he knows his brother will sniff it out right away. But none of that matters to Jimmy. With Betsy's nudging and Jimmy's lack of moral conviction, he's embraced his new level of scheming. No longer is he on the same level as he was with Marco in the flashback at the start of the episode. He's on a new elevated level where his schemes are central to his success, his career, and his identity. Upon this house of cards, his manipulation of the law, of truth, of justice, Jimmy McGill will slowly become Saul Goodman. Yet why? What pushed Jimmy to accepting this bribe in the first place? A few things come to mind. First, as we saw at the beginning of the episode and in previous episodes, Jimmy had spent much of his life trying to find himself, and much of that did not lead to him to an enviable situation, as in the last episode, episode 3, he was in jail and he had to get bailed out by Chuck. When he agrees to go with Chuck to Albuquerque, he comes as a directionless person. That lack of identity needs to be recognized to fully understand his transformation. Because when he starts working at HHM, he grows an appreciation for the law and, more importantly, for the type of person he could be. The law is a new way of life to him, a new identity for him. Yet as he pursues this career, he constantly finds himself getting stomped on by various people. He can't seem to catch a break.
Son of a bitch.
In the first episode, he defended 3 people and he only got paid for the price of 1. And in every episode so far, he's had fights with Mike about stickers in a parking lot, despite him being a lawyer trying to protect people in society who need help and need a solid defense. And his brother absolutely lacks an understanding of the struggles that he's going through as a new attorney. And perhaps worst of all, in Jimmy's mind, is that the person, again, in his mind, who is holding him back is the embodiment of everything he personally detests about the law. Someone who has a beautiful office, a car, a house, not from his own grit, hard work, and effort, but because of his daddy. I am talking about none other than Howard Hamlin. He represents everything that Jimmy is not and everything that Jimmy never will be, no matter how hard he tries. Jimmy isn't as tall, he isn't as handsome, he isn't as rich, and he doesn't have the sway and respect among the legal community. Faced with Jimmy's reality that the law is not based on merit, that the law is not equitable, it's not fair, that he's worked his butt off and he can barely get by while people like Howard live off their dad's legacy, it's at this point that Jimmy succumbs to Betsy's bribe. It's at this point that he says that he is no longer in this for fun and games, that this scheming is a profitable exercise that he can use to get the standing as a lawyer that he deserves. And maybe in Jimmy's mind, in a perfect world, he would not have to do this. In a perfect world, this would be a meritocracy where he could get ahead. But he can't see that world at the campsite with Betsy, so he chooses to lower his law career and his own self-esteem down to Betsy's level, and that sets the sails for the rest of his life. Friends, as you can tell, this is a new format where I do a deep dive into one topic in an episode. If you like this format, please like and subscribe, and more importantly, let me know in the comment section down below to let me know what you think. I'll see you next time. Bye.